I'm Casey Lau. I'm one of the co-founders of StartupsHK, and tonight we're going to have an evening with Mr. Walt Mossberg. If you don't know who Walt is, he's been around for a long time. He's been at the Wall Street Journal since 1970 to the end of 2013. His personal technology column appeared every Thursday from 1991 to 2013. Wired magazine called him the Kingmaker because of the power he had to shape an industry's successes and failures. He's been there for the launch from everything from the iPod to the iPhone to the iPad and soon the Apple Watch. And we saw one today, but it was made in China, so it wasn't the real one. And with his partner in crime, Kara Swisher, they created the All Things Digital Conference, and that's where I met him, here in Hong Kong. And what it did was it brought the big tech titans together on stage, and they launched an Asia version in Hong Kong, actually, in 2011, called Asia D, where they brought in people like Jerry Yang from Yahoo, Jack Dorsey from Twitter, and even Al Gore, Vice President Al Gore, who actually flew here commercial because of the sustainability, that's his thing. So Walt decided to part ways with Wall Street Journal in 2013, and basically he decided to take his MVP with him and start his own startup called Recode, and it started that in the beginning of 2014. So I'm very happy now to interview the man who interviewed Steve Jobs many times. So everybody, please stand up. Please stand up together and give a warm welcome to Mr. Walt Mossberg.
Thank you all.
Sorry, the chairs are not red. They're
I know.
beige.
I almost boycotted.
We had some red chairs, but they weren't nice enough, so we got rid of them. So let's take a look back. Oh, I guess my head is in the way of this shot. So this is 2011. This is Asia D. This is at the Grand Hyatt, and this is probably one of the biggest tech conferences Hong Kong has ever seen, with the likes of Jack Dorsey, who, by the way, loved Dragon Eye. Apparently, he was there every night when he was here. Former Vice President Al Gore. Even the only person who couldn't make it, I guess, was Kara herself.
Right.
She got a bit sick. What about that experience? How did you know, compared to the other conferences put together? How was this one for you?
It was well, first of all, Hong Kong was terrific for us. We loved Hong Kong, and that's why when we got through the first year of our startup, Recode, last year, and we thought, okay, we think we should do another international conference in 2015. We, like you're supposed to, as a sound business person, we sat down, looked at the different countries, and we said, you know what, we're just going to go back to Hong Kong. It was great there. So we're coming in November. We'll do it again at the Grand Hyatt. This time, our name for our conferences has changed. It's Code. These are the Code conferences. We have a whole bunch of them. And this will be Code Asia, and it will be here in Hong Kong in November.
Great. I remember you brought this guy out last time.
Yeah.
I think he was only worth $500 million at the time.
Yeah.
Since then, he's gone on to be a billionaire. He's Brian Chesky, the co-founder of Airbnb. And I ran into him in the bathroom at the Grand Hyatt.
Yeah.
And I begged him.
Did he try to rent you the bathroom?
He tried, but he failed. And I asked him, Brian, since you're going to be, because the HED was during the week, and I was like, Brian, you can be here for the weekend. And he said, yes. I said, can you please come to our conference? We had a Startup Saturday on that Saturday, and I wanted him to come by and say hi to all the startups from Hong Kong, and he was such a nice guy. He came out, did the show for us, and blew everybody away, yeah. So you had him on a panel at HED, and we gave him like 20 minutes to tell everybody the short version of the Airbnb story, and it's just a very inspirational story.
Great.
So it's great. So that's awesome. So hopefully hijack some of the other guys too. That week.
You're going to take all our speakers.
Take all of your speakers.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay.
So have a seat. Relax. It's good to see you again after all this time.
It is. It's great.
I read Recode all the time, and I have a lot of good stories in there, and we're going to talk about some of them today. But I want to start at the beginning. I kind of want to look at, because there's a lot of startups in the audience today, and I kind of want to look at, you're basically 12 years developing your startup with the Wall Street Journal's money. and then basically launched Recode. So I think this is the smartest move ever for a startup. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about the evolution, how it happened, and how you and Kara decided on breaking out and doing it yourself, and how it's been so far in the last year and a half, about, right? Since
okay, I'll give you the short version because nobody wants to hear the long version of essentially anything. You just put it in a way I've never heard it put before, but it's essentially right. We put it in a duller way. We say sometimes it's a 12-year-old startup. It's actually a 15-month-old startup, but what we did was try to be entrepreneurial inside a big company. And it's not impossible, and up to a point it works well. Of course, it depends on the company and the circumstances in the industry, but I was a columnist at the Wall Street Journal. Kara Swisher, my partner who we've talked about, was a columnist at the Journal, and we hated all the tech conferences we went to. We thought they were boring, and people gave canned speeches and just clicked through. How many have been to this? They give a speech and they click through a PowerPoint deck and read what's on the screen. It's just horrible. So we thought, we're journalists, we can do interviews. Let's do that kind of a conference, and we actually banned slides, banned speeches. But we were working at the Wall Street Journal, so we convinced them, the company that published them, which was called Dow Jones, they actually have a big base here in Hong Kong, asked us to, we convinced them to let us do it. We called it All Things D, All Things Digital. The conference actually went just by the letter D. It was a sellout and both a journalistic and a financial success from the beginning. And we did 11 of them in the US for the Journal, plus a few smaller events under that brand, plus the one here in Hong Kong. And 5 years into it, we started the website, which was editorially distinct from the Journal, but they used some of our stories. We hired our own staff and ran it as a startup. And we said to the Journal, we're going to leave, but if you'll let us be entrepreneurial and sort of have a startup as much as you can inside of a big company, we'll do it. And we did that. And what happened was, by about 2012, we felt it had run its course. That experiment had run its course. It became, if you're a startup and if you have success, you want to grow, you need to get funded. The normal thing for an independent startup is to go out and raise more money, another round or whatever. But we were 100% owned by Dow Jones. And I don't want to suggest that we weren't properly compensated. By the end, we were nicely compensated. I'll digress for 1 second and tell you that the first year we did the conference, and it made millions, we got nothing. We asked for nothing, and they were stupid enough, this is what happens in big companies, that...
This is being filmed.
I know. They're not a stupid company, and I love the Wall Street Journal. It's not a joke. It's a very fine, they're fine journalists, and it's a great paper, and I'm very proud to have worked there. But this was stupid. We did this conference, created a brand from nothing, made millions of dollars, didn't ask for any money. They didn't even give us like a $10,000 bonus or a bouquet of roses, nothing. So then the second year, we went to see them and we said, we have this plan we'd like, I forgot what we asked for, 2% of the revenues or something. It was all us, but we asked for 2% of the revenues. And they said, no, you're already on the payroll as columnists, and so we don't have to pay you anything. And we said, well, this is not in our job description, this is something else we're doing for you. So, but if you're not gonna pay us, we're going to hold a press conference tomorrow and say we're canceling the second edition of the conference if you won't pay us. And the reason is they wouldn't compensate us for this. So they said, don't do that. And they came up with some payment, and then they entered into a negotiation, and we had a proper compensation from then on. Anyway, by 2012, we were doing fine, making a profit every year. I think doing good journalism both on the web and the kind of journalism we call live journalism. It gets done on stage. I hope there's no news made here tonight, but we tried to make news at our conferences. It's very difficult. There's a lot of claims on a big company, and we needed investment money to do different things, and we just weren't likely to get it as being part of the company. So we told them we were leaving when our contract ran out at the end of 2013. That's what we did. I mean, we had a bunch of companies offer us money. We were able to raise the amount of money we had hoped to raise. We hired some investment bankers and some lawyers. Some of you in the audience have been through this. It's a lot of fun, isn't it? It's just tremendous fun having all these lawyers rewrite every word you negotiate. But anyway, we did that, and we got great partners. NBC News is one, and the other is Terry Semmel's investment firm. Terry was the head of Yahoo. Before that, he was the head of Warner Brothers Pictures for a long time, or the co-head of it. And there are minority investors. They're on our board. We've been doing it 15 months. We think we're doing pretty well, but it's like any business. You know, we have to scale it. There's always challenges ahead, and here we are.
Great. That's good. So that leads into my next question about media startups.
Yeah.
So you're doing a startup in media, and just last week, I think, or 2 weeks ago, GigaOM.com just closed down. And Om Malik is quite a famous tech journalist as well. What do you think about the landscape for media startups these days now?
Well, from what I know, and I hate to say sound promotional here, but I think the best story on that was done by us. We have a terrific media reporter, Peter Kafka, and he didn't immediately jump and try to write the whole story. He did actual reporting and waited a few days and wrote a good story. There are certainly challenges for media startups, including us, but I think the gig is a particular issue where they took on debt, which is relatively uncommon, I think, for web or media startups at least. They took on debt, they had trouble servicing the debt. They had a conference division, did not bring in the kind of revenues and profits that ours does, and perhaps some other people's do. And I think maybe they had some management issues. So I don't necessarily think that, it's very sad because they did quality stuff, and Om himself is an admirable guy who we like. Both Karen and I like him a lot. So it's very sad, but I don't think it's a cautionary tale just because there were special circumstances there. He also had a lot of venture money. If you're a media startup and you're relying a lot on venture money from the Valley, it's not the same as if you're a tech startup. Media startups have a slower cooking time. It's a different thing than I've got I've got this app. You know, it's a game. It's addictive. That's one thing. Or I've invented a smartphone that presents holographic images of your favorite movie stars. That might be a different thing. Media startup is a different animal. But I'm not going to lie to you. There are challenges. There are a lot of media startups. Some of the more successful ones get by on what are called listicles. Everybody know what a listicle is?
Everybody here's read BuzzFeed, I think.
So you read BuzzFeed. If you don't want to basically make most of your content be listicles, it's a little harder to achieve sustained profitability, but I refuse to believe it's impossible, and we aim to do it.
That's a good segue into the next thing. So the evolution of tech reporting. So listicles are things, tweets are things. What is the evolution of how you write and do tech journalism? I know you guys are very, this is your thing. But what do you think about tech journalism and I guess journalism in general now that in the digital age now?
Okay, so there's two things. There's 29 things, but I'm only going to mention two. The first is, if you were serious about doing quality journalism, and right there in the front row is Dawn Chemleski, one of our excellent reporters. She's a great example of this. We hired her from the LA Times. If you're serious about it, you really are operating under the same standards of ethics the same standards of quality that you would have at the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post. A few rows back from Dawn is Danielle Belopatowski, who is the deputy digital editor for Asia of the New York Times, and what used to be many years ago my assistant. So being my assistant is a good career. She's a very important woman in the world right now, and she's right here in Hong Kong, by the way. Danielle and Dawn and I all believe in standards and ethics, so that's number one. That's not different than the so-called old media. What is different about tech reporting or any internet native journalism is you have to engage with your audience in all kinds of platforms. So you have to tweet all your stories. You have to be smart about social media. You have to. Sometimes you get into arguments. People don't agree with you. Sometimes they like what you wrote and you want to thank them. Whatever it is, you have to have a conversation on Twitter. You have to have a conversation on Facebook. You have to be involved in other forms of Instagram, and I guess you're doing Snapchat. I mean, you have to be involved in all these things. And that's something that didn't used to be true when I went to journalism school and when I started at the Journal. I mean, I used to cover foreign policy, the Middle East, the U.S.-Soviet relationship. I mean, I got 2 letters a year, and one was from a crazy person in a prison somewhere, with orange markers surrounding it. I mean,
his name was Charles.
Yeah, who knows? Engagement with the readers was not a big part of it, but engagement with the readers is a big part of this, and so you have to be conscious of it. You have to do, for instance, you could be a writer. Could have been trained as a reporter who just writes. It's not good enough anymore. You better be able to do video. You better be able to do, we have videographers, we have photographers, but if they're not around and you have to take a picture with your iPhone, you have to make it half decent at least, and figure out a way to put it in the copy yourself in the editing system. And that just wasn't the case before.
Wow. By the way, if you have any questions, we're using the hashtag WaltHK, and we're using this new system, so it may or not work. It's sli.io, and the entrance code is hashtag WaltHK. You can ask questions there, and you can vote each other's questions up, and we'll get to those at the very end. Let's move on. I'm very curious about your insights. I love reading your technology reviews of the different products out there. This is the Apple Watch, which you were playing with today. Which was only $40 knockoff that we found in China. Apparently, China.
Yeah, let me just point out, this is also made in China.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
So that's not the distinction.
That's true.
I think it was that was developed in China to look like this.
That's right. And
but
just over time, I think.
Yeah.
So this is a device. This is the Apple Watch. I think everybody here knows what it is. It's going to be the next big thing for Apple, or is it going to be the next big thing for Apple? And will it? Do you think will it influence the world again, and all the technology manufacturers like the other products they've released have done so far?
Okay. I'll tell you what I don't know. Okay. I don't know exactly how good it will be because I don't write my product reviews unless I've tested these things thoroughly. And while I have worn this a couple of times for short bursts of maybe 15 minutes, which might be more than most of you, that's not good enough to give you a judgment, even on stage here, let alone in my review. I think it has the potential to shake things up. Not because Apple has thought this through very carefully. Those things are apps. They actually live on your phone, transmitted to the watch. A few of them don't need the phone, but most of them need the phone. And by when I say the phone, don't try it with Android. I mean, they want to sell iPhones. There's a couple things you need to think about with the pricing of this, and then I'll talk about the functionality. At the high end, this is one of the most expensive products that they sell, or any tech company sells, any consumer tech company. High end, as far as we know, and it could be that there's even a more expensive one, but the high end, as far as we know, you want 18 karat gold, rose gold, and a particular beautiful watch band, it's $10,700. That's got a lot of ink and a lot of pixels. But what most people haven't focused on is that the base price of this is lower than the base price at launch of any of their famous products other than Apple TV, which is a relatively low volume product. It's $349. That's less than the iPod started at, that's less than the iPhone started at, and it's less than the iPad started at. So it's actually for Apple, which is a premium priced company, it is an inexpensive product, not a super expensive product. Because the electronics on the $349 one are identical to the electronics on the $10,000 one. The key to whether this will succeed is whether people feel they need it. I can tell you a few things. First of all, it's the only one of these smartwatches I've seen that come in 2 sizes. You may think that's not very important, but it is important because there are people, sometimes it has to do with gender and sometimes it doesn't have to do with gender. Just prefer a bigger one or a smaller one. They are making this, again, identical functionality in 2 sizes, a bigger one and a smaller one. It has, I don't know how many dozen watch bands, from a plastic strap to a very expensive gold thing. And you can mix and match these, at least to some extent. It has to have a killer app or a series of killer apps that make you feel like you want to wear it. It's not clunky or heavy on your wrist, and that's surprising. It was surprising to me. It felt quite comfortable. The bands feel quite good. But it has to have an app that make you, that does more than tell the time, that make you want to use it. It has fitness built into it, and for some people that will be good enough. Answering phone calls, notifications, that will be good enough. But the third-party apps, I think, are really going to be the big decider here. And I predict that they will have more third-party apps and more surprising ones at launch than you might think. Let me just leave it at that. I think they're going to have a bunch of them. And my prediction about the sales of this, and I don't generally do this, but just for you, I'll say this. Apple has a lot of fans, and Apple has a lot of deserved reputation for coolness and quality. So I think they'll sell a bunch of these. I think you'll see the traditional Apple press release. I don't know if it'll be the first weekend or the first week or the first month, but the first period of X days or weeks, there will be a press release that they sold 1 million or 5 million or whatever it is. And then I think it'll cool down for a while. And then I think they'll tinker around if they have sales concerns with the price. More apps will be added, more functionality will be added, there'll be some word of mouth, people will come into the Apple store to get their broken whatever fixed and fool around for a while playing with the watch. And there is a chance that, of course, that it will fail, but there's a good chance that there'll be a sharp acceleration of sales. But it may take a while. One last thing. People think the iPod, the iPhone, and the iPad all took off immediately. They did not. They all took a while. Dawn just wrote a very good piece making this point. They all took more time. If you go back and actually look at the facts, they took more time than your memory thinks they did. At the iPhone, they had to cut the price by $200 90 days in. I don't know how many people remember that, but they did. It started at $600, subsidized by the phone carriers. And Steve Jobs had to cut it by 200, and then eventually they cut it by another 200. It took off, but it didn't take off at 600. So I don't expect this to be some kind of instant hit. I think they are in it for the long game. They understand that, and I think that's what you should look for.
I see you wear a normal wristwatch right now.
Wait a minute, I'm proud to say it's a $99 Seiko.
Okay, $99 Seiko. If this thing
And
works,
it doesn't just tell the time. It tells me it's Friday the 20th.
Oh my God.
Right on there.
That's great. But if this thing works well, are you going to trade up your watch?
Well, I will be wearing it to test it.
Yeah.
I think because of my job and because I happen to be someone, I own all the brands of devices. I mean, which we pay for I pay for either with my own money or the company's money. Because of my job, I probably will buy one. It's conceivable though that if I don't like it or it doesn't do anything for me, I'll just stop wearing it and only use it to test things.
Okay.
But I'll probably buy one.
And do you think that this thing will influence other hardware manufacturers?
It's Apple.
It is, right?
It's Apple. Remember that? I mean,
You want me to tell me?
it will. Look, the state of the market right now on watches, smartwatches, and really on wearables in general, is we're in the beginning of the first inning, to use an American sports term. It's very minor. People who are very serious about fitness, runners and things like that, account for a lot of the market. In fitness bands, for instance, or other kinds of wearables, that's a limited market. There has recently been an estimate, I can't prove this, but there's recently been an estimate that says the total of what's called Android Wear, which is, this by the way runs on something called the Watch OS, which is a subset of iOS. Android's similar thing to that is called Android Wear. The totality of all the brands, of all the companies that made Android Wear devices sales have been 750,000 worldwide. Not 750 million, 750,000. So it's pretty weak. There's a long way to go. This is Apple. If they have any success in this, yes, it will influence other people.
Okay, great. This thing I've seen around Oculus Rift. I'm sure you've worn it before. I've worn one and I almost threw up wearing it. It's so realistic. Facebook just bought them for quite a bit of money.
Yeah.
What do you think about this thing if you tried it and the future of this virtual reality world that's coming in now?
Well, first of all, I think it's potentially very good for gamers. It is true that it also can do things for people that aren't interested in playing games. One of our Recode team reviewed something called Google Cardboard, which is essentially does this but using cardboard. It's a do-it-yourself, put it together. Has anybody done this thing that makes virtual reality goggles out of cardboard? And
you put your phone in there, right?
Put your phone in there, okay. and you can watch a Paul McCartney concert from 5 years ago with pyrotechnics, and you can look up and you can look down and side and all that stuff. So, I mean, that's their way of demonstrating that you can do more than games on there. Honest to God, I have no idea what the ultimate potential is for this. This is bulky and ugly. And you have to really be interested in whatever the content is in there to do it. I don't think that you're going to see people walking around Central on the streets wearing this thing. I just don't. But I'm not saying it will fail. I mean, they may get a big enough audience, willing to pay enough money, either them or somebody with a similar device, and enough good content may be made that there's a great business in that.
This thing was just released a couple weeks ago. It's the new MacBook from Apple.
Yeah.
So this thing I think is a little bit, it's an interesting device that's coming out. First of all, it's super sexy looking, but it's compared to their other MacBook products, very underpowered. What do you think of this? Is this like a netbook? Is this the thing that Steve Jobs said they would never make?
No,
or
sexy.
Yes, let's all agree that it's super sexy.
No, I'm not talking about the pictures.
Oh.
I mean, I've used it, I've held it.
Okay.
I'm getting one shortly. I thought when I picked it up, it was a balsa wood mock-up.
Wow.
That's how light it is.
Wow.
It's 2 pounds, so it doesn't weigh nothing.
Yeah.
But I love my MacBook Air. I consider the MacBook Air the best notebook best laptop any company has ever built. And I wrote that, and I stand by that. For a whole lot of reasons that I'm not going to bore you with.
Sure.
But this makes the MacBook Air look clunky and heavy and all that kind of stuff. So the physical design, the weight, the thickness, all that kind of stuff is awesome. They also make it in gold, which I didn't think I would care about, but it looks kind of amazing in gold. It's not 18 karat gold, but it's gold. I believe that what they're trying to do here is a little bit what Microsoft is doing but failing at, which is to bring some of the sensibility. This is like having an iPad with a keyboard, but bolted on instead of having to put it together. And that's where they're gradually heading. I don't think it's a netbook because it has a lot of local storage, but obviously everything is moving toward cloud storage anyway. The big question about this is not the processor, which I agree with you is more like a smartphone or a tablet processor. It's an Intel processor, but it's called the Core M, which is more like I said, the mobile device processor. You're not going to do Photoshop on this, but most of the things most people do will be fine on this, and it has a retina screen. Big question on this to me is two things. They have this cool new kind of connector, and they're not alone in this. It's an industry standard that replaces USB and replaces charging and replaces video out in one connector. They only put one of them on here. That may bug people. Secondly, they invented a new keyboard mechanism here that they say will be just as good, and a new trackpad that they say will be just as good. To me, in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, the keys just felt not right. But it's conceivable that within an hour or two, which I didn't have with it, you might get used to it, or a day, I don't know. Again, they're playing a long game here, and we'll see. But it's cool. Very cool, very good.
Now, I'd like to talk about some of the people you've interviewed on the stage. And I really like to, because I remember Agent D, Steve just passed away, and you did a nice little memorial for him. I thought maybe you might have an anecdote about, or a story that you remember him by. And there'll be a couple of people that you've interviewed after this one that you remember on stage, or during an interview, or during a product showcase that you might like to share with us. And I guess we're looking for like kind of maybe more of like a leadership thing, something that that is very good for maybe some kind of company talking to the media, that kind of angle.
Speaking purely as a journalist, the first half of my career, I felt very lucky to be able to cover giant historical events in the geopolitical realm. So I got to meet Mikhail Gorbachev. I got to I was friends with him, but I got to meet him. I got to be at the Berlin Wall a few days after it fell. I got to do a lot of cool things like that. In the technology part of my career, I've gotten to know people that are equally going to be written into the history books. This is one of them, who I knew quite well. But I also knew Bill Gates quite well. I know Mark Zuckerberg. And I'm not saying that to brag. It's just a journalistic thing. And I feel like it's as if I went into a time machine and could write about the people that started the car industry, or the people that started the Industrial Revolution, or whatever. It's been a great, lucky thing for me. And I have a lot of Steve Jobs stories. I try not to tell too many of them because most of them were off the record. And even though he's no longer with us, I wrote 4 or 5 of them in an essay, like you say, right after he died. But if you want to know about leadership, he ran that company, which wasn't quite as large as it is now, but still quite large, essentially without committees. He ran that company. This is what he did. One of the great talents of my 13-year business partner and close friend, Kara Swisher, is that if we're doing an interview together with some luminary on stage, Kara may just pop right in with an off-the-wall question. that I love, that hadn't occurred to me. And so we're talking along with Steve Jobs in one of these interviews and about something serious. I was actually, arguing with him, and got done with that. And Kara said to him, "What do you do all day?" I said, "Steve Jobs, Steve friggin' Jobs. What do you do all day?" And he looked at her a little strange, and then he answered the question. He decided to turn it into a question about how he runs Apple. And he said, "We don't have committees. We have one committee. And we have two major meetings a week. One is called the executive team meeting. And I can't remember, but I think he said there were 12 or 13 people on that. And he said, it's nominally a 3-hour meeting, but if we don't get through everything, then we have another 3-hour meeting, up to 3 hours the next day to finish. And the way the meeting works is they go through every product. Apple doesn't have that many, but they would go through every product, talk about how it was doing in the marketplace, where they were taking it next, what were the milestones in the improvement of the product, and how was it going. Then they would go through all the secret products that we don't know about. How's that going? Should we keep going on it? Should we not go on it? Whatever. And then he would be at that meeting, of course. Then the other meeting, which he would sometimes be at, and this tells you something about Apple, was a marketing meeting. And he just had these 2 meetings. And that's what he did all day, and that's how he ran the company. He also said, and I think this is, speaking as someone who is theoretically now, this says on the business card I've given to some of you, that I'm co-CEO. Jobs said on stage at our conference, and after that repeated it elsewhere, that the most important decisions he or the company ever made was what to leave out, not what to put in. And those are the hardest things to decide. But I mean, he believed in curating. And I really don't care what you build. I agree with him. That's not very brave, I suppose, but I do believe in him, agree with him. So you have to have a focus. And you have to decide to be laser focused on whatever you're doing. And that means leaving out stuff. The difference between a Samsung phone and an iPhone, Samsung does some things better. But the difference primarily is Samsung knows how to churn out hardware, and you can read the list of specs. Some of them are better than on the iPhone. They have nobody that says no to software. You open a Samsung phone, it's a spaghetti of useless software. Half it doesn't work, half it replicates. There's 2 browsers, there's 2 or 3 email clients, there's 2 video players, one of which plays videos you downloaded from Google, one plays videos you downloaded from Samsung, and the other one doesn't play the other kind of video. Same with music. I can go on. I mean, it's crazy. Nobody has curated what's on that phone. And Apple is different. Apple curates, and they get called closed because of that. But they actually are trying to care about what they're presenting to you in a disciplined way. And so I think it applies to any business. I think you have to make, the hardest decisions you have to make are what not to do. Now, can I tell them a funny story about Steve Jobs?
Yes.
It's not about leadership. We, as I said before, we have a rule at our conference that you can't show slides. And Steve Jobs, the only conference to my knowledge he spoke at, or was interviewed at, was our conference. He did it about 6 times. Once famously, some of you know, with Bill Gates together on stage. But one year, I walked into the ballroom about an hour before the conference went on, and Jill Pendergast, who runs conferences for us, and I think is in the room somewhere, or certainly here. Oh, right there. Jill, stand up. Jill, stand up. This is a fantastic person. You all are applauding. Jill comes over to me and says, Steve Jobs is backstage preparing 50 slides. And I literally had talked to him the week before and reminded him no slides. and many of you watched his presentations at Apple events, and he always had slides, right? But at our conference, he actually had appeared at our conference before without slides, but this year he had 50 slides. So I go over to 2 different Apple vice presidents who were in the room. The audience wasn't there yet. It was just, you know, people related to the presenters. And I said, Jill just told me that Steve's backstage with slides. You've got to go tell him he can't use them. And they go, we can't tell him. We can't do that. I'm square, but each of them, these were separate conversations. I can't tell him, I can't tell him, you have to tell him. So I go backstage and I say, Steve, what are you doing? He says, I'm preparing my slides. I said, Steve, we talked last Wednesday. I reminded you, no slides. He said, no, you didn't. You said no PowerPoint. He said, these are keynotes. And I said, bullshit. Just bullshit, no slides. And he looks at, and he had like 3 people there, and they were like shaking. And he looked at me and he said, okay, no slide. And he went on stage with no slides, and it was great. So, is that okay? Is that
Great story, great story. I would love to see Steve Jobs working keynote on a Mac, ready to present on your stage. It's amazing.
You've seen Steve Jobs work keynote.
I have, but I haven't seen like typing like, oh, they correct this font and this drop shadow doesn't look right.
I don't know, he wasn't making the slides, he was, I don't know, arranging. I don't know what the hell he was doing backstage, but
So amazing, amazing. You've interviewed this guy a couple of times.
I have.
Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook founder, and I've seen a lot of them, and he's evolved quite a bit. I think there's a lot of young startup founders in the audience. What have you seen in him as you've interviewed him through the years, and as he's gotten more mature, his company's grown from the first time? I think the first time you guys interviewed him, he was like me right now, I was like all sweaty and like.
No, I was the last time we had him actually. Well, Mark's still a young guy, but and you all know he's learning Mandarin, and apparently. One day I was walking down the street in Palo Alto. The main drag there is called University Avenue. How many people have been there? Lots, I'll bet. And I happened to be with my wife. It was a vacation. I was not even doing business. It was a vacation. My wife wanted to see where do I go and hang out on these business trips. And so we were walking down University Avenue, and Mark Zuckerberg stopped on the side. He was walking by himself with a backpack. He stopped on the sidewalk, said hello to me. We chatted for a few minutes. I introduced my wife, and she said, I thought he was a college freshman. I said, no, he's a billionaire businessman. And you know, Mark has evolved quite a bit. I think Sheryl Sandberg, who I admire a lot, has helped him a lot, and other people have helped him a lot. And so, you know, what can I say? My problem with Mark, where I've argued with him in public and in private, is privacy. I think Mark's, in his DNA, does not have the same belief in privacy that I do, at least, and I can't speak for other people. But I think even there, you see Mark pull back some. I think he believes in that people like to communicate in small groups that are closed as much as they like to communicate with everybody at once. So he's tried to build some of those things into Facebook. So I really, you know, I think Mark has a lot of promise and has fulfilled a lot of that promise, but has more runway to go, and I'm optimistic about it.
What do you think they're building over there? I mean, we have the social network. They bought the Oculus Rift. They're buying WhatsApp. They're buying all these kind of different apps. What do you think they're?
Well, WhatsApp, let's face it, is a very logical thing to buy. I mean, you know, some of you all of you probably have smartphones, and you know that if you try to send a message within Facebook, the phone now moves you over to the separate messenger app. It's much better to have WhatsApp or something like that. In terms of Oculus Rift, I can't explain why he bought it, except he's rich and he wanted to buy it. And that wasn't meant as a dig at Oculus. Neither were my earlier comments. It's just, it doesn't seem logically part of Facebook. I think he's trying to build a complete content and advertising company there, and communications. So we had Chris Cox, their product, I forget his title, what is it, Don? Product manager, product director of product, something. The guy that controls your entire news stream, news feed on Facebook. And we had him at one of our conferences that was devoted to media about 3 weeks ago. Time is crazy, within the last month. And he basically said, we now want to house your content on Facebook. Not just point to it, not let you buy an ad about it, but actually house it. So in other words, the staff at Recode produces X number of stories a week. We have a website. We already know, this is a truth, even for the New York Times, Danny, correct me if I'm wrong, fewer people than, say, 5 years ago, many fewer people will start at your home page. They will come in sideways. They'll see a great story by Dawn, that I tweeted, or that Recode itself tweeted, or somebody else tweeted. They'll go to the link, they'll read Dawn's story. They don't stay on the site the way you would like them to. They go back and do something else. And we already know that. Now, the new possibility is they may not care at all about being on your site. And if Mark posts Dawn's story, and at the beginning, I assure you, he will be very generous with us financially about that. And we'll make money. So we'll be tempted to do it. So will the New York Times. But eventually, if you're used to finding all of Dawn's great stories on Facebook instead of on Recode, he can pay us less, he can treat us worse, he can do whatever he wants. So it's going to be an interesting few years.
Right now, do you see a lot of, that's a good question, do you see a lot of traffic coming from Facebook?
A lot of our traffic comes from Facebook and Twitter. I would say a little more from Twitter, but sometimes, some weeks it's more from Facebook.
And from Flipboard. You have Flipboard traffic?
We were a charter participant in Flipboard. I personally am very fond of Mike McHugh and his team. And but I would say the volume is not for us. Maybe different from for other people. It's not super high. We're actually I think doing pretty well with a Japanese company which has just started in the US called Smart News. I don't know how many of you use it. It's an app, and so we're aggregated.
It's a RSS feed aggregator or something like that.
It's not RSS. It's some other kind of feed they get from us.
Okay, cool. Well, let's go to talk about this guy.
Is this going to be a picture of you?
Yeah. So this guy is also changing the face of a lot of different things. Maybe you can just tell us a little bit of what you see in him.
Well, we had him at our conference a year or two ago. He was fantastic. I think he did almost 2 hours on stage answering questions. He passionately believes in going to Mars, as you all know, and it's interesting to talk about that. Passionately believes in electric cars and charging stations, and he swears up and down, as he did at our conference, he's going to build one you can afford. And at our conference, he let slip kind of, and I don't think he was being crafty about it. He said, "Oh, and I'm interested. I'm going to propose in a week or so the Hyperloop." And we said, "Whoa, stop! The what? Hyper what?" You know, and he has since talked about that. So he's got big ideas. He's not afraid to push them, and that's what it takes to be a person that manages to achieve two things. They manage to become very wealthy, and at the same time, they manage to change the world. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Mark, Elon is like that. So he's actually a quiet guy, and we actually had to work very hard to persuade him to come to the conference.
Really?
Kara and I ambushed him. This is not a joke. We went into a private dinner that we were not invited to, but where we knew everyone. And Elon was in the corner of the room, squeezed our way through people, and we just hammered at him until he said he would come.
Wow.
That's what a bad guy I am. Not admirable.
You gotta get.
Why am I even up here?
You gotta get the guy, man. You gotta get the guy. That's great. It's very good. This is a big story right now on Recode, and it's something that I'm not sure a lot of people in Hong Kong have been following. But Elon Pao and the Kleiner Perkins story. I think it's something that's big in tech, especially in the States. I see it, and you guys are really on it with a lot of different viewpoints. And there's a trial happening right now. Maybe you want to expand a little bit on this, and what's your take on what's going on there?
So, Kleiner Perkins, as you know, is, I think they've declined a little bit in recent years, but they were probably the most famous venture capital firm in Silicon Valley and one of the oldest. Or the face of the firm is John Doerr, probably has been here in Hong Kong, I'm sure. Ellen Pao is a woman who had aspirations to become, I forgot the titles, but a sort of senior partner or whatever it was at the firm, and is suing them for sexual harassment and discrimination. I think she wants $16 million. We consider gender bias issues, and of course race bias issues, sexual orientation, any of those things. For us, it's not just language. If you looked at our staff, it's truly reflective of that. And we think Silicon Valley and the tech industry in general has a shameful record on this. Some of these great companies that have given us wonderful products don't have a Sheryl Sandberg. Most of them don't have a Sheryl Sandberg, or anybody remotely that powerful happens to not have a penis. And it's a problem. It's a serious problem. And so we are staffing this. I mean, nobody else, to my knowledge, in the media was live blogging this trial. We have 2 reporters live blogging this trial, and then we write analysis pieces and that sort of thing. You wouldn't think it would be necessarily sexy. There are a couple of interesting anecdotes. Senior male members of the firm showing up. She alleges, and another woman alleges, that there are hotel room doors in a bathrobe, stuff like that, and that's unforgivable. But more insidious are the things you don't chuckle about, and that are not salacious per se, but just not being invited to meetings, not being invited to dinners, being given bad performance reviews for being pushy. And I've never met Ellen Pao, so I have no idea. It certainly is true that there are women who are not qualified for certain jobs, and there are men who are not qualified for certain jobs. But she's making a case about sexual discrimination and harassment there. And it turns out that we have learned quite a bit through this trial about just how few women have any power in VC firms, and it sheds a light on the broader problem in the Valley. So we, as a news organization, consider it very important.
Well, we'll just keep following to see what happens. Let's go, this is the last couple of questions, but I'd like to, since you've interviewed so many of the famous, legendary entrepreneurs in the technology world, what do you think makes a good founder for, to kind of share that knowledge with some of the startups in the room? What makes somebody Elon Musk style, guy, or Steve Jobs style founder that you can see? Like, I'm sure you've interviewed tons of people, and some of them have maybe kind of gone down in favoritism or whatever compared to some of the big guys. So what makes a good founder to you?
Yeah, I mean, I should point out that I admire and have met, and anybody who's worked around me or with me knows this. Danielle certainly knows this. I've met the founders of many small startup companies you've never heard of, some of which have failed and some of which have not failed. I admire people who are not afraid to fail. So the first quality is you have to be not afraid to fail. Steve Jobs failed. He lost the PC war. He got thrown out of his own company. He came back a much smarter business person. You have to be not afraid to fail. We once had on stage at our conference a woman named Regina Dugan. She was the first woman to run DARPA. Do you guys know what DARPA is? Okay, it invented the internet. And it's an arm. It's the advanced research arm of the Pentagon. And was not a military person. She was a civilian. She was the first woman head of it. She came to our conference and she said, "The same gene that makes you succeed is the gene that makes you not be afraid to fail." So her mantra in running that agency, and she's now at Google, where she has the same point of view, is not that she encourages you to fail, but that you need to take the risks that might cause you to fail, and you can't be afraid of that. So I think that makes a good founder. I think there's a million things, of course, that you have to keep in mind. Consideration for the people that work for you, loyalty, mutual loyalty, all those things. But I'll mention one other thing that I think, Matt, that I think ties these people together, because Elon Musk and Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg are very different people. But when you have an idea for a product, it could be a service like Facebook, it could be software, it could be hardware, it could be whatever. It could be nothing to do with tech. And you believe that you can deliver capabilities to your customers, whether they're consumers or businesses or wherever they are, that they don't have now, that are disruptive. You can change the world or put a dent in the world, which I think is a Jobs phrase. You have to be maniacal about it, and it's not always pleasant. I'm not saying you have to be an awful person, but sometimes you might have to be unpleasant to other people. And sometimes you might really have to push. I mean, to give you a truly tiny example that in no way compares to what these people do, those pictures you've seen up there. I mean, when I proposed to do my tech column at the Journal, there were no star columnists on the paper, none, zero. Which sounds bizarre, I know, because at least in the States, every paper had a star sports columnist. Many had a star political columnist. The Wall Street Journal didn't have anybody other than on the editorial page. But in the news sections of the paper, they didn't have anybody. And there was considerable opposition to it. But I believe this would be a thing that would take off. That this would be a thing that would help the paper, that would be good for me, that would be good for the reader. And so you have to make enemies sometimes to push things. That's a tiny, tiny example. I'm not comparing, please believe me, I'm not comparing myself to these people. Jobs, we already know the famous, how rude or awful he can be sometimes. Bill Gates would throw people. The number 4 employee at Microsoft once told me, who was a personal friend of Bill's, told me he got thrown out of a meeting once when Bill didn't like an idea he had, and the phrase that he heard as he was leaving the room was, "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." You shouldn't say that to somebody you've known, who's your friend, who's your number 4 employee, but that's what happens.
Does you want to change up the mic?
We're changing mics. Okay, this mic doesn't work at all.
You just hold it closer to your mouth. Here's the next question. Startups engaging with the media. So I'm sure in the room after we're finished, you'll be attacked by every startup here to talk about their startup. What are some good ways to get a hold of you and your team to kind of pitch, startups that you might cover?
Well, a really bad way is to mob me as I leave the room. No, I'm not serious. It's a really bad way. The odds that I will remember you are very low if you do that. Even if you give me your card, which I'm sure you all have big stockpiles of cards, but it's not a good way. In our particular case, the best thing to do is send an email that is succinct, that tells me why your thing is different than everybody else's thing, that sounds similar, and then I have a meeting with you. It could be a phone call, it could be a Skype call, it could be an in-person meeting. Same with our other product reviewers, same with our news reporters, and may make judgments about whether to cover you that you disagree with, and we may be wrong, but there will be nothing you can do about it. So you may go to some other media outlet and get luckier, and that would be my best advice.
Great. I guess you've been here, so you know a lot about what's going on. You just came back from China. and told some great stories at lunch. But I guess what are your perceptions, and maybe what do you think of Silicon Valley's perceptions of maybe Asia and its technology world? Is it all like, oh, it's just Samsung out there, or it's all Xiaomi out there?
No. Silicon Valley cares a lot about Asia in two ways. One way, of course, is that everything they make is made in Asia. Everything I'm wearing was made in Asia.
Even your shoes, yeah.
Even my shoes, yeah. Not all in China, by the way. There are lower wage countries that will make shoes than China. Silicon Valley cares about it for that reason, but they also care about it as a gigantic market. It's my understanding, and I could be wrong, I'm sure there are people in the audience that know much more about this, that just the population of people with wealth, however you want to define that, in China exceeds the total population of the United States. So these are very important markets, and people in Silicon Valley care about it. My perceptions of Asia are essentially worthless, Casey. I mean, I've been in China for 1 week. This is my maybe 4th trip to Hong Kong. I've been 3 times to Korea, and 2 or 3 times to Japan, and that's not enough for me to sit on a stage and give perceptions of an entire continent. I mean, about the only thing I can say is that Dawn and I took a couple of walks in Beijing and really got scared by the air pollution.
Everybody does, yeah.
But I bet in 25 years when we come back, the sky will be blue. I mean, there was a time when you wouldn't want to walk outside in LA either.
Yeah, that's true. Interesting. Okay, so let's go to some questions from the audience. I've got the app here. Looks like a lot of people posted stuff and they've been voting up. So one of the questions here is from Mr. J. Otway. His question is, and it's got 5 votes, do you ever feel the effects of ageism that is pervasive in tech culture and the Valley?
Yeah, I sometimes do feel that, but I have to say that one of the advantages of one of the things that goes along with being old sometimes is that you get well known, and you've done something for a long time, and people have grown up reading you, and that shields me somewhat from it. But it's definitely there. I mean, I feel the effects of it, and you don't have to be my age to feel the effects of it. You just have to be 40 and begin to be perceived as too old to understand anything. And it's insane. It's an insane point of view. It's not because young people are bad or wrong or stupid or any of those things. Young people are super important as consumers of these products and builders of these products. But at least in the US, again, I don't know anything about the distribution of wealth in Hong Kong or in China, but in the US, people my age have all the money. So it's a terrible mistake to assume that you should build a product that we would have zero interest in buying.
Another question we have here from Richard Lai. In the West, Xiaomi has been the darling of the Chinese smartphone market, but there are other local brands. What other local brands that maybe have caught your attention? Besides that, I know you said you have one actually, right? You have other Xiaomi phones?
I have a Xiaomi phone in my pocket. I'm testing it. I decided it would be a good idea to test it not just in the States over Wi-Fi, but to actually use it in China. I found I could use it much less than I had hoped because of the Chinese policies on blocking certain things, including Gmail, which our company's email is based on. But I still have been testing. Was testing it today in Hong Kong. I don't know about it being the darling of anything. I think that perception is wrong. People in Silicon Valley know about it because of its valuation, and because they did an event in Silicon Valley, and because their vice president of worldwide expansion is a guy that used to be an important guy in Android at Google, who everybody in the Valley knows. But I saw some other fantastic products. I'll give you one example. DJI, I think is the name of the company, that makes drones, and they're the world leader. And I met with their CEO, and I got the whole history, saw all their drone models. We went outside and flew one of the drones.
Phantom, right? The Phantom.
We flew the Inspire.
Okay.
which is the succeeding model.
Wow.
And you know, I was super impressed with that. I saw some other Chinese-made phones. I think China is, it's my opinion that that we're kind of at a tipping point now between China just being a fabricator. I mean, I also went to Foxconn, learned something about that, and China being a market for other people's products. We're at the tipping point between those things, and China being able to go into particularly into the West, with a brand that is Chinese, with an invention that is Chinese, that is not comparable to anything that exists in the States or in Europe, that nobody's thought of, nobody's done as well, and it's just pure Chinese. And they go in with the name of a Chinese company, and if they're willing to spend the money on getting into alignment on safety rules in a place like the US and on intellectual property, I see no reason why a Chinese company can't be a big household name in the US. I mean, Lenovo comes close, but to me it doesn't entirely count because they bought a well-known American brand, and they, even years after they had bought it, they had a deal where they could keep using it. So they had a kind of leg up through that. But I think a Chinese company can come in and do it the way Samsung did it, the way Toyota did it, the way Sony did it, and I expect it to happen within the next few years. I think we're just very close.
Okay, great. I'll let one question in the audience, and then we'll finish it. Does anybody have a question they wants to ask by voice? This guy right here. Stand up, please.
Okay. So you said your Asia experience is quite limited, so maybe you don't want to talk to Hong Kong directly, but what do you think is kind of necessary for a city or a region to promote startups, to promote innovation? What does kind of government need to do? What kind of funding things need to be?
It's a great, did you guys all hear that question?
Okay, say it again.
So what's necessary for Hong Kong, or really any place to do, to promote a startup culture? What does the government need to do? What kind of funding do you need to have? What are sort of the conditions? It's interesting because somebody asked me the same question earlier today. I'm not an expert on this, but I will tell you one thing. It's a gigantic mistake to assume the government is going to do it for you. It's a gigantic mistake to sit around waiting for the government to do it for you. And that's not because I hate governments or I'm anti-government or any of these things. I just think if you look at the examples that I'm familiar with in the United States, if you think that the people we've just seen on the screen waited around for the government to create some special economic zone for them, or to open a shared workspace, or I can't even remember the name of it, but the last time I was in Hong Kong, I took a tour of this futuristic Star Trek looking building somewhere on the edge of the island, and I thought, whoa, I mean, what is this about? That's not the way you're going to get to where you want to go. So you really have to rely on yourselves. I mean, obviously the government, you can lobby the government, and believe me, Google and Apple and Microsoft and Facebook all lobby the government about getting more visas, about certain tax policies, whatever. But they don't wait for the success of whatever happens in the outcome of that lobbying. I mean, they all lobbied for net neutrality, which has been a big issue that they've just won in Washington. But it wasn't like Netflix stopped operating while waiting for that to go through. So you got to depend on yourselves, and you've got to just have the guts to make those decisions about what's your big idea and push it through, what to leave out, as I said before, and you have to have VC funding, and you have to make this a place people who are smart engineers and designers and marketers want to stay, or if they don't already live here, they want to come here. And the government can help you with that, it's fine. Any help you get from the government is great. Don't wait for it, do it yourselves. That's my advice.
Great. Okay, we're gonna wrap it up there, but we'll give another plug. The Code Conference is in November, 17th and 19th at the Grand Hyatt. Well, why did you choose Hong Kong? Why didn't you do it in Beijing, Shanghai, Singapore, Tokyo? Why did you choose Hong Kong?
Why not?
Great answer.
Why not?
That's a great answer.
Why not Ireland or
You love
Israel?
dim sum, right?
I mean,
You
we
love
talked about a bunch of countries. We chose Hong Kong because we think that the market that is within easy reach of Hong Kong is the most important tech market in the world, and because we were successful in having a Pan-Asian plus American conference here before, and we think we can be successful again, and people here were very willing to work with us.
Great.
And that's why we chose it.
Great, excellent. Okay, everybody, that's it. Let's give Walt a big round of applause.